Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Joe Thomas podcast. This is actually my first ever podcast that I've done. So it's going to be pretty unprofessional, to be honest with you. So we'll see how it goes. Let me just see if I can just reach across there. Yeah. So basically, a little bit about myself. I talk about American politics. I'm mostly on Substack. I've been on Substack for quite a while, like about 6 months now, and I talk about yes, I'm obviously an Aussie. I've got an Aussie accent, but I mostly talk about politics. And on Substack, I write about American politics, media, and culture. So yes, so basically, if you follow me on Substack, Joe Thomas newsletter, you'll see me there. Now, a lot of people on Substack are actually quite surprised to find out that I'm an Aussie because obviously up until recently I hadn't done videos on Substack. So people just assume because I'm writing about American politics that I must be like an American, but obviously I'm an Aussie, which is not that unusual because in Australia we do have a bit of a fascination with American politics. I talk about that on my Substack articles. Basically, Australian politics is pretty boring, pretty mundane, which is we kind of like it that way. We don't want the sort of train wreck sort of politics that you see in the United States at the moment with Donald Trump. I'm centre left. I could probably consider myself a liberal from that perspective. If I was in America, I would have voted Democrats. And it's quite alarming to see what we're seeing over in America at the moment with Donald Trump. And that's what I write about on my Substack article. So a lot of stuff that I write about. Probably one of the biggest overarching things is I always noticed over the years is that I always say this: when it comes to MAGA, every accusation is a confession. And what I mean by that is that so many of the things that the MAGA movement has criticized the Democrats of or people on the left over the years, when Trump got into power in 2024, not only did he do those things, but he actually did those things on steroids. So so many of the things that he said he wasn't going to do, he ended up doing. So this was like a different Donald Trump than we saw before. One of the things that I think a lot of from the media side, people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk have been hypocritical about is they were very, very critical of liberals and things like free speech or social media companies being biased, all that sort of stuff. And then obviously we see Elon Musk purchase Twitter, and he ends up becoming the most biased person on the planet. I mean, if you compare him to, say, Mark Zuckerberg, who a lot of people on the right criticize, people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, and they criticized him because of the Hunter Biden story and things like that. But overall, Zuckerberg is probably libertarian. If you were to look at his politics, he would be libertarian mostly, right? So he's not some crazy left-wing person the way Joe Rogan is always painting him out to be. He's actually said he thought Zuckerberg was far left, which is hilarious considering that, he's always fighting for less regulation. He's always fighting for less taxes. These are not far left things. And Democrats are always trying to get rid of monopolies, things like Google, smash them up, that sort of stuff. So this is he's hardly a far left person. He has some social views, but that doesn't mean anything. In 2025, even a lot of conservatives are for like gay marriage, they're not against gay people or anything like that. So, this isn't a correct assessment of Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg, the only time when he goes to Congress to fight for something, he goes there to fight for less regulation, less taxes. These are not left-wing things. He doesn't go to Congress to fight for gay rights or anything like that. Anybody can put something on their post and say, "Hey, I'm for gay rights." That's not what he's about. He's about less taxes, all that. So that's what he goes and fights for. So it wasn't a big surprise when Zuckerberg suddenly became part of MAGA, because I think a couple of things there is, one is Trump was appealing to the big tech billionaires, people like Elon Musk and things like that, by saying to them, look, we're going to regulate you less, we're going to tax you less. And these are big things for people like Zuckerberg. That's the number. That's what he cares about. He doesn't care about the culture wars. That's like number 20, number 30 on the things that he cares about. Also, last year, Donald Trump wrote a book. And during that book, he actually he said that he thought that Zuckerberg should be in jail for the rest of his life or for a very long time because Zuckerberg banned him on Facebook. Now, that's quite an incredible thing to say. First of all, Meta or Facebook are private businesses, so they can ban whoever they want. Secondly, he was banned after January 6th, so after he'd been kicked out of office. And once he said that he was going to run again, they put him back on. So there wasn't a huge amount of damage. I don't agree that maybe they should, who knows? I don't think they should have done it, but it wasn't like he was banned during his presidency or when he was running again, right? And so he had to go there and kiss the ring because, he's threatening to put him in prison, but is also, he's probably thinking this might be good for my company as well. So it is hardly a surprise because people like Zuckerberg, it's quite amazing. They're like incredibly rich, powerful people, but they seem to come across as quite spineless, and they just go with whatever's fashionable at the time. If it's fashionable to be, pro LGBT or pro whatever, pro social thing, he will go that. If Donald Trump gets, suddenly gets a lot of momentum behind him, there's the assassination attempt, all that stuff, and that gave him a bit of momentum. He suddenly started to get more popular and more popular, more popular. I think people like Zuckerberg saw the writing on the wall that he was going to win, and when he won, he wanted to jump on that Trump train, and that's hardly surprising. But he goes there, and then suddenly he's on Joe Rogan, and he's talking about toxic masculinity. How it's people. It's hard to be a man these days. It's like he's been part of MAGA for like decades. And so he did the usual thing, which is and then obviously go there and talk about Joe Biden, the Biden administration put a bit of pressure on me during COVID to take off some videos and stuff. Now, what's interesting about that when he was on Joe Rogan is they don't mention the fact that Donald Trump was actually the president during that period. Joe Biden wasn't the president, and it wasn't Joe Biden bringing Zuckerberg. It was some people in the Biden administration or some people in the Democrats calling low-level people at Meta, right? So you got two low-level people talking to each other. This was hardly, a big threat. Yeah. So, and Zuckerberg goes, oh, well, I wasn't there. I wasn't part of it. I heard about it later. So obviously it wasn't a serious thing, right? So, so that's the difference is you have Democrats who are like, look, can you be careful about what you put on there? There's a lot of misinformation, all that sort of stuff. And then on the other side, you've got Trump threatening Zuckerberg with life imprisonment. Like the difference is massive. But of course, if you listen to podcasts, right-wing podcasts, whatever, sort of Rogan type podcasts, it's all you hear about is Democrats are against free speech, and I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote for Trump because he's part of the free, and that's the biggest BS in the world. Trump's threatening Zuckerberg, but not only that. When Trump was elected, he started threatening the media, CBS, 60 Minutes, ABC, all that. And he started saying they should be closed down. He wanted to close down user organizations that he doesn't like. I mean, I can't imagine being more free speech, anti-free speech than that. And he wants to imprison the 60 Minutes reporters because they did an interview with Kamala Harris last year during the election, where during the election, they slightly edited out. Now, I've seen the before and after, and the difference is just so mild, it's ridiculous, right? But he's coming out and going, oh, this is the worst thing that I've ever seen in my life. The usual stuff that he tries to, hype it. Of course, he doesn't want, if you go online and you speak to MAGA and you go, hey, this video here, and they're like, oh, well, it's the principle, because they know it's like nothing. And then Elon Musk, the free speech absolutist, this part gets hilarious. He goes on Twitter and he says on Twitter, the reporters of 60 Minutes and the people who were involved in editing that video of Kamala should be in prison for a very long time. So now we have Elon Musk who says he purchased Twitter because he thought free speech was such a big thing that even though he knew he was probably not going to make a lot of money out of it, it was the principle of it, right? So this free speech absolutist is now wanting to imprison, right, reporters at a news organization because they slightly edited a video. This is hilarious and ridiculous, and probably one of the most authoritarian things I've ever heard. Now, neither Zuckerberg or anybody, right, on that side of politics, or the ex-owner of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, ever said anything like that. They never said, you know what, that Fox News reporter, the Fox News reporters during the Dominion lawsuit, the one where they had to pay like $700 or $800 million because they were caught lying, right? They never said, oh, these people should go to jail for the rest of their lives. But a slightly edited video, something that all news organizations do, and suddenly they're off to jail for like years. What's also hilarious is the sheer hypocrisy. And again, when it comes to MAGA, every accusation is a confession. During the election, Donald Trump went on Fox News and he was asked about all these files, whether if he became president, would he release all these files? And they were talking about the JFK files, the MLK files, and of course then the Epstein files, right? Now, when they asked me about the JFK files, Trump went, absolutely, let's release it. He was very keen to do it, very happy, let's go for it. MLK, absolutely, let's release that. But, it's a big but, when they got to the Epstein files, he was like, maybe, yeah, not so sure about that one. There's a lot of phony stuff in there and a lot of phony accusations, right? Yeah, I wonder who the phony accusations are in there. Maybe him or people he knows, who knows, right? So obviously everyone knows he had a close relationship with him, all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. So what they did is when Fox News released that interview, they took out the part, they edited out the part where he was humming and hawing about whether the Epstein file should be released, and they edited that. Now, that is huge. That is way bigger than editing Kamala Harris going, like that. That is a billion times worse. Now, nobody, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, or anybody on the right are saying that those Fox News reporters or producers should go to jail for the rest of their life, even though that was a million times worse, because obviously the reason they edited that out is they know that the MAGA base absolutely are obsessed with the Twitter files. Not the Twitter files, sorry, the Epstein files. And if they heard him say that, they'd be like, oh, that's a bit weird. Although knowing the MAGA cult as I do, they probably just would have looked, they would have made it some excuse for him anyway. But yeah, that sort of hypocrisy I see all the time. It's like, if a Democrat was in the same city as Epstein 10 years ago, he's compromised. If their dear leader, Donald Trump, had decades of a good relationship with Epstein, not only that, but they socialized together, they partied together, right? Yeah. He once said in an interview that Epstein is a terrific guy who happens to like women on the younger side, right? They partied at Mar-a-Lago, all these stuff. But for the Trump supporters, it's like, there's no there. There's nothing there. Okay, so maybe there isn't. I have no idea. But how can you compromise everybody on the left for having less relationships with Epstein, but suddenly someone who has a bigger relationship with Epstein is suddenly nothing to see there? And what we've seen since the election is the Epstein files don't seem to be coming out. They did that whole pretend hoax thing where they came out with the suitcases and stuff. It was hilarious. Yeah. And it seems like it's not coming out. And if they do release it, I guarantee you it's going to be highly, highly redacted. So again, it's all this, constantly what I find, and this is what I write about on my Substack newsletter, the Joe Thomas newsletter. Go on it, read it, subscribe. It's free to subscribe on it. I write about all the hypocrisies of these particular parties. And I write about the fact that Trump in 2016 is a very different Trump to 2024. And what I mean by that is in 2016, he said he was going to do a lot of things like tariffs and all that, but he actually never ended up doing big tariffs. He ended up doing like targeted tariffs, on the chips. That's, stuff that maybe wasn't a bad idea, right? And the Democrats kept that going. But he did talk up a big talk that he was going to do bigger tariffs than that. But in 2016, he was surrounded by normal Republicans. And a lot of the stuff that he said he was going to do, he was talked out of. So for a big part of that period, he pretty much campaigned. He pretty much ran as a conventional Republican, big tax cuts for the rich, that sort of stuff. There are some things that a lot of people don't know on the MAGA side is that he increased drone strikes by 400%. Not only did he increase drone strikes, when Obama, who was obviously doing a lot of drone strikes as well, there was a thing in Congress that if any civilians were killed, it had to be reported publicly. When Trump came in, he increased drone strikes by 400%, but then he took away the accountability where Congress would report on those, so nobody knows. So often you'd hear MAGA go, "Oh, Obama was bombing people and civilians were dying." It's like, well, hold on. Trump was to increase those drone strikes, and we have no idea who's dying because he took away accountability. Now, people like Glenn Greenwald and all that, who became sort of sympathetic towards Donald Trump, they barely talk about that. Now, if Obama had done that, if Obama had taken away accountability, right, for the drone strikes, it would have been 24/7 stories around the clock. Again, Trump is graded on a curve. And there's a lot of people in the online space who used to be liberal or left-wing, who then sort of grifted to the right. These are people like Dave Rubin, Glenn Greenwald, or Jimmy Dore. All those people have, and they all sort of moved over there. But now that Trump's in power and he's talking about shutting down news organizations, talking about invading Greenland. I mean, I personally never heard him say before the election he was going to invade Greenland. And the interesting thing is that obviously Biden was declining. I agree with that. I think he should have stepped aside way earlier. I think that should have happened. I think they should have. Then they could have done a primary, and they would have had a better chance. Although I still think Trump would have won because the overriding thing in 2024, and it's not just in America, it's actually all around the world. There's never been a year like 2024, where incumbent governments all around the world got kicked out in huge numbers, the biggest in the history. I think the only incumbent government that didn't get kicked out in 2024 was the Mexican government. And that was because of post-COVID inflation. Inflation affected every country on the planet. Now, if you live in America, you would think Biden started inflation and it was only happening in America, but it was actually much worse in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, other countries. In fact, under Biden, they brought down, and the Democrats brought down inflation the most by a million miles compared to any other country. So just to recap, inflation affected every country on the planet, but Biden did the most to bring it down. But that was a hard story to sell during the elections because inflation is accumulative. So even though inflation is not getting higher, it's still higher than it was 4 years ago. So it's a hard thing to sell. And it's much easier for the opposition to blame everything that's happening during, post-COVID inflation on the incumbent government. So I think it was always a good thing, but I think they could have done a lot better, the Democrats, if they were able to have primaries and put in someone forward that the base would have liked more, right? And so I think, so sure, there was on the Biden side, but whatever you say about his decline, and it was there, obviously the debate was horrendous to watch, but all that stuff. But the thing is, no one ever said, you know what? Because there's all these people coming out now, saying, "Oh, I was with him. I'd be in an office with him, and he'd be fine for like 2 or 3 hours. He'd be okay." And then suddenly, 4th, 5th hour, he started getting a bit sleepy. Sleepy Joe, and then he started, and it was a bit harder to, have conversations with him. But no one ever said, you know what? He was losing his mind, and he kept saying, "I want to invade Greenland. I want to annex Canada. I want to put massive tariffs around the world that almost sends America into a recession and possibly a Great Depression if we continued to go at that high level that he did before." He never did any of that, Joe Biden. He pretty much everything that he governed as policies, everything were just standard Democratic policies. And that's because he surrounded himself with very competent people. And it was those competent people that were making most of the decisions, right? And obviously, Joe Biden was not like he was at the debate 24/7. There were times, obviously, he was better than that, but still, you can't have someone running against Donald Trump like that. So they needed a good communicator to go up against Trump. So again, whatever you say about Biden, he never governed like someone who was losing it, right? Now, imagine, but Trump gets elected and then he talks about invading Greenland, annexing Canada, tariffs, all these crazy stuff that he talks about, right? Doing, right? And then even annexing Gaza and having like his, plush apartments there and all that, that AI video, it was, oh my God. Now, there's no doubt if Biden had done any of that, there would have been people going, this guy needs to go to a psychiatric hospital. We need to get him in here right now. It would have been great. It would be way worse than it was, right? But Trump gets graded on a curve. There's no doubt about that. And I think what he's realized is that if you say 100 crazy things a day, right, people grade you on a curve and they get overwhelmed with so much BS and so much craziness, they tune out. And so they bake that into your personality. But if you're someone who's a bit more normal and maybe lies, because Trump lies like 100 times a day, and he's normalized lying. He's made it like he lies so much that the media can't keep up with his lying. And so that's a really hard thing for the media to do, because if you just pick up every single lie, you couldn't cover anything else, right? You'd be covering that 24/7, so it's impossible. So but if someone on the left does that, or someone else who's a little bit more normal lies maybe once every 3 months or once every 6 months, everyone would go crazy. But that guy's a liar. He's a big, big liar. Now, that's the thing. Like, you get rewarded for just being crazy every day compared to that. So Trump's normalized that, which I think is a really bad thing, because future leaders might start thinking, hey, if I just say nutty things all the time, people stop listening to my nutty things, and they just say that's just Donald, that's Trump, that. So I think that's a big part of, I also write about that as well. Also, I think the reason Trump can get away with that stuff is because he realized early on that he was building a cult, and it is a cult. You can't look. There will every political party will have people who are really delirious about their leader. Obama had a little bit of that, but after a while, people are like, "Oh, he's not quite what I thought." But with Trump, he takes that to a like North Korean level, right? And he's basically the things that and he knew that early on. One of the first things he said in 2016 when he was running is, "I could shoot someone, and I still wouldn't lose a vote." Now, think about what he's saying there. He's saying that his followers are so devoted to him. People always say TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. I think it's TDS, Trump devotion syndrome. It really is. These people are just so devoted to him that and he knew that. He was aware of that the first year, and he built on that. Because he was aware of that, that's why he knew he was able to say the stuff he does. And it was almost like a test. How many crazy things can I say and not lose any of my base? And it works out. You could say a lot of crazy things. Like in 2016, he was chanting, he'll put Hillary Clinton in jail, right? Lock her up, right? Now, when, over emails, right? Now, when Hexeth and those people, and they were talking about the Houthis and all that, and suddenly it gets leaked out from Signal to a random journalist. Like, that's 100 times worse than anything that Hillary ever did. Suddenly, there's no there. There's nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal, right? Like the Epstein files. Like, he's never going to release the Epstein files, and if he does, they're going to be highly redacted. Again, if Democrats didn't release the Epstein files, it was like there's got to be something compromising there. So there's always a thing. The other thing is George Soros. How many times did we hear about George Soros? He was this evil person in the background, giving Democrats money, helping them campaign, all that sort of stuff. But George Soros never owned a big social media site like Twitter. And Elon Musk uses Twitter as basically the propaganda arm of MAGA. During the election, he did. Besides giving hundreds of millions of dollars, he would campaign with candidates over there. He was posting stuff on Twitter that was manufactured videos of Kamala, and he knew it was. And he deactivated the community notes so nobody could comment on them. So now, again, now think about the things that they accuse Zuckerberg of doing. Nothing. All Zuckerberg did was he felt pressured into blocking the Hunter Biden video, which I don't agree they should have done, but he did it. It was only for a short period of time, right? Not for a long period of time, but it was under pressure. He didn't realize what was going on, but he regretted it. But Elon Musk is not doing it out of, I'm not sure what to do. He knows what he's doing. He's 100% aware he knows what he's doing, and he doesn't care. And he's basically doing it at a billion times level than anybody else has ever done, because Zuckerberg, Dorsey, they're basically libertarians. They weren't big like Democrat fans. They weren't out every day. They would barely ever talk about politics. They would post about politics once every 6 months, right? Like Elon is like 24/7 MAGA. He's obsessed with it. He's got, he had Doge and all that sort of stuff going on there. And that's the other thing about why I think it's a cult, because how is it possible that the MAGA base could believe, right, that the person that they're trusting, Donald Trump, to look for fraud, right, and to look for scams and waste would be Donald Trump, who years ago started Trump University and had to close it down because a judge called it a scam because it actually wasn't a real university, which, maybe that's the reason he's going over Harvard. I have no idea. But that's the thing. Like, this is a scammer who's done fraud before, and now the MAGA base is saying, yeah, I'm trusting that person to set up Doge to look for crime. And one of the first things that they do under Doge is they dismantle the fraud police. This was an organization within the government that would go after people who defrauded average American people. So they would help them get their money back, right? Or they would go after the perpetrators. That was one of the first things they did. They dismantled the white collar police. Why? Because they are the fraudsters. Donald Trump is a fraudster. Basically what they're doing is they're dismantling the guardrails that in 2016 to 2020 stopped him from doing what he's doing now. He learned his lesson. He knew he had to dismantle all of these guardrails. So he got rid of all that, the people looking for it. He basically defunded the police, but not the people out on the street, the people looking for fraud. And that's a great thing for Donald Trump. Elon Musk also got what he wanted, which is basically he got less regulation in the government, and he got less oversight for his businesses. So I think people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, they think there's a massive difference between someone coming up to you with a gun and robbing you on the street and someone defrauding you, or stealing your money through white collar style criminal, right? They feel like, well, that's not the same thing, and so they dismantle that. Yeah. So, that's all it was. They just wanted to get rid of all that. They don't care about free speech. They went after, as I said, when Fox News, right? When Fox News was basically, the Dominion lawsuit back in, I think it was 2017 or something like that. It was 2021 after the stolen election thing. None of them was saying they should close down Fox News, but all we're hearing is they should close down, CBS, ABC. They want to close down news organizations they don't like. They don't want news organization next to them. And it's, again, every accusation is a confession when it comes to MAGA. And that's the thing. So these people are basically setting up the system so they can rig the system for themselves. And the MAGA base, the fact that they believe that that's the people, like that Donald Trump is the one who's going to help them. I mean, to some degree, I almost feel sorry for him. And I wrote about this on my Substack, Joe Thomas newsletter, because I heard Levitt, the White House press secretary, she was saying that she was she was outraged that anyone would ever imagine that Donald Trump would ever look out for himself. She basically said that Donald Trump is the cleanest person on the planet and would never ever look out for anybody else but the American people. It was such an obvious lie, considering that the whole plane thing, the crypto stuff, the crypto like grift and all that. And the fact that she felt she could say that, to me, says that Trump and the Trump administration have no respect for their base. Nobody hates MAGA more than the Trump administration. Nobody has more contempt for MAGA than Trump, because they lie to them all the time. Really, really obvious lies. And they feel okay with saying that because they think that their base is that stupid. Because think about things like the tariffs, right? So he says, well, China's going to pay for the tariffs, or the other countries will pay for the tariffs. That was his story for ages. And if you go on Twitter, like I do, you would hear it. No, that country. All right. Now everyone knows tariffs are a form of self-harm, right? You end up paying for that tariffs. The country pays for the tariffs, right? So he's saying, no, China's going to pay for the tariffs, all these countries, right? Then recently, Walmart came out and said, well, because of those tariffs, we're going to have to increase our prices. And then Trump says, well, he posts literally this, Walmart needs to eat the tariffs. So this makes no sense, because if China's paying for the tariffs, why is Walmart eating the tariffs? But again, the fact that he can say contradictory things like that, it was so obvious to a 10-year-old, and then feel he can get away with that, it has to be a cult. And I honestly don't know. Even the Epstein thing, where he's not releasing the files, and I wrote another thing about, it must be so awkward for Donald Trump to have a base that is so obsessed with the Epstein files. I mean, he would love it if they just stopped talking about it, right? Because, that was like, if they could be obsessed about anything, that would be the last thing he would want them to be obsessed about. But he's worried with that one, But even with that one, if you go online, they're still making excuses for him. Oh, no, he's not releasing it because he's waiting for the right time, or, he's playing 9D chess. You got to trust the process. They just do all these mental gymnastics trying to come up with all these reasons for why he's not doing these things. And again, it's basically, it's impossible. He gets away with it because he knows the base. Although in saying that, I do kind of feel that he's not losing. I think he's losing a little bit of his base, but not a lot. But who he is losing is the moderates and the independents. The people that voted for him, not because they liked him, but because they thought he was going to be better for the economy. And those people, they don't care about. The thing is, since COVID, and before then, but it got worse, is most people don't follow politics like I do, or people, or people on Twitter and things who follow it every day. Most people are so distracted with like TikTok, streaming services, gaming, whatever it is. Maybe they've got a family, they've got jobs, they haven't got time to look at politics every day. So, and especially with, as I said, all the streams since COVID, a lot of people started getting on streaming services more, and TikTok and all that. So even today, there's less people now who follow politics than ever in history, right? And what polling shows is the less engaged you are with politics, the more likely you are to think favorably of Trump. The more engaged with politics, the more favorable you are of the Democrats. And that's obviously because you're more informed. And so in 2024, when you saw him showing up in court every day, and all the indictments, the stop the steal stuff that he did January 6th, the fake elector plot, all that, people weren't paying attention to that, but they just saw him showing up in court every day. And he kept saying, it's a witch hunt, it's a witch hunt. And so maybe some of those people were like, why are they trying to stop him from running? And maybe that, you know what I mean? Because they're not looking at the facts. They're not looking at the court cases. They're only looking at it through the peripherals, right? So I think that worked in his favor. So incumbency is definitely a good thing for Trump. And it was in 2016 and 2020. But it's the opposite. Sorry, I meant the opposite. When he's not the incumbent, Trump is very good. When he is the incumbent, Trump is very bad. And that's why he was kicked out during COVID, right? Because people were seeing him every day on TV. And there was no real opposition at that stage. He got most of the attention because of COVID, and Biden was kind of in the background. So all the eyeballs were on Trump. And if you look at Trump 24/7, people like him less. But in 2024, people were very much focused on Biden, his decline, all that stuff. And then the people who weren't paying attention were just focused on their everyday living, which, as I said, post-COVID inflation affected the whole planet. So it was, people were paying more for rents, home prices, that sort of stuff. Young people couldn't get into the job market. A lot of it, if you look at all the polling, was based on the economy. That's the number one reason why Joe Biden was kicked out, for the same reason that all the other incumbent governments around the world were kicked out during that period. So Trump was really good at playing the opposite, right? Because he only had to come in once in a while, right? Now, the problem for Trump is he's not very good at being the incumbent, and all the eyeballs are now on Trump 24/7, and he can't blame the opposition because he is now the leader. So the people who are experiencing high rent prices, the people who can't purchase a home, the people who are paying more for petrol, all that stuff, he was telling those people that it was going to go back down to like 2020 levels, right? That's what he was telling. He literally was running ads. Now, that hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. Inflation it's not going to go down. It's probably going to continue going up, right? But at least it's not going to go down like it was before. So those people who only pay attention to their everyday lives, like they're not paying attention to politics, they're going to be like, I voted for you because you told us you were so great with the economy, right? So those people now are going to probably start having buyer's remorse. And I think there's been a couple of special elections which went favorably to the Democrats. I think the midterm is going to be really bad. When you see polling about the Democrats being at 20%, you've got to keep in mind that they don't have a leader yet. There's no one up there. But when Democrats run in individual races, they do very well. And I think they're going to do very well at the midterms. And so, so Trump's in a big trouble now because he's now the focus. As the incumbent, he does really badly. Yeah, because he's got no one to blame. That's why when Joe Biden was in the news in the last couple of weeks, he loved it because it was like, I can take a break. We can he always wants to go back to the past. Before, when it was in 2024, it was all about Hillary, right? At the midterms, it's going to be about, they'll try to keep Joe Biden going as long as they can because they think it's in their favor to do that. So we'll see what happens. But yep, I'm going to try and do one of these a week. If you love to subscribe, please do like it, comment, that sort of stuff. Also, you can, if you want to read my newsletters, you can read my newsletters. They're on Substack, the Joe Thomas newsletter. I've also got videos on there. I've got a video that I did with ex-Congressman Joe Walsh. I don't know. He was a Republican. He was a Trumper in 2016, but then became an anti-Trumper. He's very much against anti-Trump. He sort of reached out to me on Substack, and I did a video on that with him, and we had a conversation. We talked about Australia, how we have compulsory voting here and all that sort of stuff. So it was a bit like, he's a libertarian, so it was a bit like compulsory voting. So, so we kind of talked about that, but American politics as well. But yeah, I'm really I hope you enjoy this. I want to do it once a week. I said it's my first time. I know I'm not very good at it yet, probably hopeless, but I hope to get a little bit better. And if people want to have a conversation with me or jump on or whatever, leave a comment. Just let me know that you're listening or watching, that sort of stuff. That'd be great.